Well, it's that time of year and Christmas napkins are all over the stores. These 3 napkins I found at Home Goods this weekend, and I decided to make some fun crafts using these napkins. Hi, my name is Katie from Lady Red Crafting, and let's get started with craft number 1. To start this craft off, I'm using a frame that I found at the Dollar Tree, and I really liked the beads and the white frame on here, so we're going to just remove the happily ever after, and we'll place that on a paintable surface. And to start, I grab my sip sander, and we're just going to sand any rough edges. Sometimes when there's some printing on top of something, the letters are raised, and I didn't want them to show through our paint and the napkin. Next, once we've painted everything with our Waverly chalk paint in the color white, we're going to allow that piece to dry. Now let's grab our Mod Podge and paint a nice coat over the top of this board. We'll set that aside to dry. Let's get our napkin ready. So what we need to do here is you need to remove the different layers on the back side of the napkin, and a lot of these napkins come with 3-ply. And I find that using a little piece of painter's tape helps me just remove those back layers of the napkin. Next, let's cut out one of these cute gnomes. And I'm cutting it slightly bigger than the board because I find that it's easier to place the napkin on the board with a slightly larger piece of napkin. And that way I can center it better. And once we get everything into place, we can sand that extra napkin off. So we're taking a piece of parchment paper and a hot iron, and you don't want any steam, just use it on the low setting. And you're gonna just melt that napkin right on top of that Mod Podge. Next, I grab my zip sander and I sand off all of those edges. Now let's grab some ribbon, and I found this ribbon at Walmart. And I thought this went really well with the napkin. And I'm gonna make a basic little bow here. And I just made the shape of a bow and used a piece of pipe cleaner to wrap around the center. And this will allow me to get a nice tight center around that bow. Next, I just cut some quick dovetails and remove any extra piece of pipe cleaner by just snipping that off. Now I'm gonna grab another piece of ribbon, and this is just a small piece about 2 inches wide. And I'm using some hot glue, and I fold it into thirds. And this will allow me to wrap this around the pipe cleaner, and I'm gonna hot glue that to the back side of this bow. And it just makes this bow really pretty. And with all bows, I have to fluff it out a little bit. Now it's the fun part. We get to put our little sign back together. So we're just going to reinsert our little gnome into our sign and just re-secure the back side. Next, we're going to add that bow to the top of our frame and just hot glue that right to the center. This is such an easy, fun craft that you can do with any napkin for any season. This is perfect for a shelf sitter, to your tray, or to hang on a wall. And if you enjoyed this first craft, hit that subscribe button below so you don't miss out on any more. Craft number 2. So let's start with 2 palettes from the Dollar Tree and a beautiful napkin. We're going to take these palettes and I put them on a paintable surface, and using my Waverly chalk paint in the color Plaster, we're going to go ahead and just paint a coat of paint on the top of these palettes, but I'm going to leave the rest of the palettes natural wood. And once that paint has dried, we're going to grab some Mod Podge and paint over our painted areas on the palette. Then we set them aside to dry. When I was at the store, I fell in love with this napkin. I love the vintage look that this napkin has and how it brings pink back into Christmas. We're going to start by removing the different layers on the napkin, and I'm using a piece of painter's tape to help me remove the back layers of the napkin. I cut 2 squares out of the napkin and placed them on top of our mini palettes. Next, I grab a piece of parchment paper and lay that over the top, and I use my hot iron to iron the napkins onto the palettes. And you guessed it, I grab my zip sander, or you can use a sanding block, and I sand off any of the extra napkins. And for the layers that were in between on this palette, I did use a razor blade to cut some of those. Now I placed this back on our paintable surface, and we're going to go ahead and paint these with some Mod Podge. So this month I'm excited to be participating in a fun playlist called Recreation Inspiration, and this playlist was inspired by Kristen K. Thank you 6 Kids and a Glue Gun for hosting, Crafty Art Shack, and Crafting in Mimi's World. The playlist, the hosts, and the inspirational video are all linked in my description box below. Please check all of them out and give them some love. They are all very talented creators, and I think you will be very inspired. And for these palettes, I do recommend that you do 2 coats of Mod Podge. And once your palettes are completely dry, these work great for coasters, but also can be great decor for a tiered tray. Craft number 3. So for this craft, I'm starting with this beautiful snowflake napkin and a ball canning jar. And one thing I found with decoupaging is you always want to have a nice background. A lighter color works great, and I typically stick with either white or plaster for different colors for my background. And what this does is it allows the napkin that tends to be sheer when you're putting it onto that surface, that white or that plaster color brightens up the napkin and allows the colors to be very vibrant. Now while our jar dries, let's prep our napkin. Let's start by removing the back layers of the napkin. I like using a piece of painter's tape to help start the napkin from removing it from the back side. And now let's cut our napkin in half. For my next step, I'm going to use an egg carton, and I'm setting my jar on top of the egg carton to help it have a shelf to sit on while I'm painting. And then I'm going to take my Mod Podge and I'm going to paint a coat of Mod Podge on the top half of the jar. Now let's grab our napkin, and we're going to lay that napkin over the top of the Mod Podge. We're just going to set that on very carefully. Once you have it in the place that you'd like it, I'm actually going to take some cling wrap, and I'm going to place a small piece over the top of my napkin, and I'm just going to slightly press down the napkin onto the Mod Podge to help smooth everything over the surface. And once I'm satisfied with the smoothness of my jar, I'm going to remove that cling wrap, and I'm going to leave that alone and let it dry. I know that's the hard part, letting it dry, but you do need to leave it alone. And once it is completely dry, you can go ahead and repeat that same step on the other half of the jar. And since the napkin is a little bit larger than the jar, I do trim a little piece of the napkin off and only allow for less than 1/4 of an inch of overlap. And once we remove the cling wrap, I noticed that on the bottom part of the jar, it needed an extra coat of Mod Podge, so I added that really quickly, and then I'm going to set that back on my egg carton to dry. And while that's drying, let's work on some embellishments. These wood snowflakes came from the Dollar Tree last year, and I'm just going to stain them with some antique Waverly wax. So I found these pearled push pins at the Dollar Tree, and I thought these would go great in the center of our snowflake. So I'm using some pliers and just removing the push pin part of these. And next we're going to use some hot glue and just apply them to the center of our snowflakes. So now that our jar is dry, we're going to grab out that Mod Podge and we're going to paint a coat to seal everything in on the first half of the jar. Then we'll repeat once everything has dried. And now that our jar is dry, let's embellish. I'm using some jute twine that has a white stripe in it that we're going to use around the top layer of the jar. And I found this twine at the Dollar Tree. It was in the nautical section this spring. And to start the jute, I did use some hot glue, and then we're just going to wrap it around the top of the jar until you are satisfied with the way it looks. Next, I'll cut the twine and add a little bit more hot glue just to make sure nothing falls off. And I found that using this makeup applicator from the Dollar Tree is a great way to press down on some hot glue without burning your fingertips off. So let's add our snowflake. I thought maybe I'd put it in the center of the jar, but then I liked how it looked up with the twine. So I grabbed my hot glue and just hot glued that right into place. And now our jar is complete. I just love how this turned out. You can leave it as is, or you can fill it with some greenery or other flowers. And if you haven't subscribed already, please hit that subscribe button below. Craft number 4. Let's start out with a clear trivet from the Dollar Tree and a beautiful napkin. I'm going to start by just removing the bottom layers of the napkin using a piece of painter's tape. And this craft I really like because it's something you can do for any season of the year, and it is very quick and easy to do. Let's grab our trivet and we're going to flip it over. And I'm using a heat tool, but you could use a hair dryer as well if you don't have a heat tool. And you're just going to just warm up the little trivet legs, and we're going to remove them with a screwdriver. Don't throw them away because we are going to reattach them in a little bit. Once everything is removed, I like to clean my trivet with either Windex or alcohol just so it's all ready to go before we add our decoupage. Now I placed the trivet on a paintable surface, and we're going to go ahead and paint the back side of this trivet using some Mod Podge. So once that Mod Podge is completely dry, I do remove it from the paintable surface so it's on a sturdier surface. And then we're going to take our napkin and we're placing it face down on top of the trivet. So you want to see the back side of that napkin. And once you've done that, I take a piece of parchment paper and my hot iron, and I'm going to just iron on that napkin. Go ahead and grab a piece of sandpaper or a sanding block. I like a zip sander, and I'm just going to sand down in a downward motion until all of the excess napkin is removed. Now let's place that trivet back on a paintable surface, and using our Mod Podge, we're going to seal the napkin into the back side of this trivet. And once the Mod Podge is dried, I'm using my hot glue gun and I'm going to reattach the legs to our trivet. And now let's flip this over so you can see what our trivet looks like. Wow, this looks so amazing. I love how this turns out. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button below. And as always, craft more, stress less.